What's up, guys? Okay, I'm really excited to announce that today's adult beverage supplier is Jinge Brewery. Jinge was founded in Beijing by longtime friends Chris and Alex. These two creative geniuses, with a shared passion for the fermented golden elixir of life that we call beer, are constantly hunting down rare ingredients and trying new ideas with which to create some of the best beers I have ever had. Jinge is constantly pushing the envelope of what is possible with brewing, while at the same time celebrating its roots and changing the world's perception of Chinese beer. Let me tell you something, guys. Most people don't even realize that China, and Beijing in particular, has a vibrant and world-class craft brewing culture. But if you look just a little bit deeper, you will find that Beijing has an extremely vibrant craft brewing and taproom culture. Jinge stands out as a leader in this field and has hands down created some of the best brews I have ever had. No doubt about it. If you are in Beijing or ever get the chance to visit, I highly recommend you visit one of their tap rooms and partake of the golden magic juice that those wizards Chris and Alex create. You will not be disappointed. I'll put the links to their website and their other details in the listed show notes. Today, I'm having their signature American IPA called Flying Fist. Flying Fist is abundantly dry hopped for a burst of tropical fruit, fresh pine, and zesty citrus, which smacks you in the mouth harder than a villain in a Shaw Brothers movie. This brew has won the bronze medal at the Asian Beer Cup in 2014 and 2015, and a bronze at the International Beer Cup in 2016. It's highly recommended. But as always, guys, remember, drink responsibly and abide by your local laws. Once again, I appreciate any and all support for both the Drunken Boxing podcast as well as the Mushin Martial Culture YouTube channel and all the endeavors that I do through my Patreon. We have a Patreon. It's been set up just for a couple of months. If you enjoy these endeavors, want to assist me and support me in continuing to do both the podcast and whatever else we release on the Mushin Martial Culture YouTube channel, pop on over to the Patreon page and you can pledge what you can pledge there. There's a couple of tiers. The Patreon page is, you can find it at patreon.com/Mushin Martial Culture. The links are in the show notes. And once again, I appreciate any and all support. Okay, let's get into some news. On my YouTube channel, which is the Mushin Martial Culture channel, I am, as always, striving to create content that is interesting and beneficial to martial arts enthusiasts. Recently, I have released the second of my Bagwajang 10-minute primer videos, which continues to introduce some foundational basics and practices, and I plan to continue with these just as soon as summer's dog days of heat pass us here in Beijing. Another project I have recently released, which is very close to my heart, is the Lizaming documentary series. This series covers the history and actions of my Bagwajang grand teacher, Lizaming, who sacrificed much in order to promote and disseminate the art of Bagwajang. It is a documentary that was released on the 100th anniversary of his birth and features information about his life and interviews with people, including his close disciples such as my Shifu, Di Goyong. There is much information in there that is not well known in the West regarding many aspects, including the relocation of Dong Haichuan's tomb and others. I'm subtitling this, adding relevant info, and plan to release it in 5 parts, so go check it out. The links to this video and the other one, the Bagua Primer video, will be in the show notes. In other news, one of my previous guests on the podcast, Simon Lockett, who is a Bagwajang practitioner and resides in Japan, has just launched his YouTube channel called Wok Drop. Simon, apart from being a skilled Chinese martial arts practitioner, is a highly trained Chinese chef who specializes in the Sichuan style of cooking, which he studied and apprenticed in Asia for many years before becoming qualified. He is collaborating with Mark Mastrandrea, also a previous guest on the podcast, who is a Chinese doctor and skilled martial artist as well. There will be combinations of herbs and ingredients featured for various health aspects based on Chinese traditional medicine in the Wok Drop channel as well. So it is a promising and exciting endeavor for those that are interested in these aspects who wish to learn more about these interesting subjects. So do go check out the Wok Drop channel. The links are in the show notes below. Alright, with that done, let's get into this week's episode. My guest today is Leslie Conn. Leslie Conn is someone I have known for quite a number of years, and indeed he is someone I consider a mentor. He was originally born in Zimbabwe in 1961, and he moved to Hong Kong in 1987 in pursuit of martial arts and its related cultures. He went on to complete a 20-year apprenticeship with Master Kwan Run Chang as his closed-door disciple. Les was always deeply fascinated with martial and China's military history, and he embarked on deep research, which he has done non-stop since. His focus was on the lost and forgotten aspects of Chinese martial arts history, with a particular focus on Yin Fa, or the Chinese art of stealth. He has an immensely profound knowledge from both historical research throughout East Asia and also deeply developed martial skills from a lifetime of practice with skilled teachers. He currently resides in South Africa and has started opening up much of his valuable knowledge to the public. We got into some very interesting aspects of Chinese martial arts history, practice, and culture in this podcast, and I'm sure you will enjoy it as much as I did. So, here he is. I give you Leslie Conn. All right, welcome, Mr. Conn, Les Conn. I'm honored to have you on this episode of the podcast. You're somebody that I've always looked up to. I've known you online for quite a few years, and you're somebody that I consider a mentor. So I'm very happy that you've given me this opportunity to chat to you about your path and your martial arts experiences. So.
Hi, Byron. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, and you humble me with your words. I'm just a simple guy.
Well,
so thank you anyway.
Well, I think you underestimate yourself. But anyway, we'll get into that in a minute. So, I mean, I of course know your background, but maybe you want to give the listeners just a bit of your background, pertinent background information. So, basic introduction.
Okay, well, kind of key points. I've been training since 1972, so that's 48 years now. I've been researching, and when I say researching, it's very deep researching using manuscripts and old collected documents since 1987. So that's 33 years of research. I started doing martial arts in my home country in Zimbabwe, which I later found out has a very strange and interesting background with martial arts.
Really?
Anyway, I started off with Chinese Kung Fu, specifically Lohan and Judo, and I practiced karate and whatnot and everything else in between since then. But my main interest was Chinese Kung Fu, and it was Lohan. And I say was because you'll see later it's a little different now.
Okay.
What else can I tell you? I've had all my life being taught by Chinese and Japanese martial artists directly. I have had one or two Western people contribute,
right.
But my particular age group, there were very few Westerners that knew anything, even in the Japanese classic martial arts.
Yeah, I mean, you're considered one of the...
I've had to make my path a bit of a hunt, a bit of
right.
a journey to go and find the right people to learn from.
Right.
And you'll see that eventually ended up being a bit of a sore, something that just keeps rubbing on the same spot, because I've watched in the last several years many things change in the world of martial arts that have literally changed because of the internet and people talking.
Sure.
I think that's roughly the background.
All right, so maybe I could flesh it out a little bit. I mean, you started off in Zim. Were there any prominent or key people there that influenced you, or that you started training with, that you wanna mention, or was that just a small step in your larger picture?
No, I think there was two key things. There was a Chinese man by the name of Mr. Wong,
okay,
a name that eventually became very important to me because my wife has the same surname, but not connected.
Right.
But the guy who really changed everything was a Japanese man. His name was Sasaki Sensei.
Okay.
And he had come out from Kyoto, and for whatever reason had gone to Zimbabwe, or at that time was Rhodesia during the war. And he taught martial arts of various kinds to the people of Rhodesia. And is funnily enough, he's still there today, as far as I know.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
It is. It's incredible. And we've now got a Kyokushin world champion there. We have another Okinawan 8th Dan there. And so it's a very strange little country with this amazing martial arts background.
Well, it never comes to mind when you think of Zimbabwe or even Rhodesia as having, a well-developed martial culture or such people like of these standards that you mentioned. I mean, that's news to me.
It is very odd. I eventually found out what the reason for that was. I visited South Africa, and we bumped into a Japanese woman who told us about the flood from the early days. So I'd be going back down now into the early 70s, where there was a racist problem in South Africa, and people who didn't want to live with that pushed north, and they went into the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, which is now Zimbabwe and Zambia, and
that makes sense,
and so on.
That makes sense.
And so there became this little collection of Oriental people. I mean, blow me down. There you go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you put it that way, that actually all seems logical and the thing to do if you are in South Africa at that time. And that's where you are now. I mean, I didn't say it earlier, we didn't mention it, but you're currently in Ballito, correct?
I'm in Ballito in South Africa. We moved here from 25 years in the Far East, mainly in Hong Kong. And so we'd moved out here to have a better life for our daughter, and basically we love nature. We like getting out into the bush and whatnot, and so here we are.
Okay, yeah, of course. Hong Kong's not so environmentally abundant, especially as kids growing up there, so I can understand that. With the pollution, with the hustle and bustle, with the pace of life, I can understand that step. And coming as a person who comes from South Africa, I mean, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Financial, economic, and political problems aside, it's environmentally probably the best country I've ever been to live in the world. So
I would absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. So from Zim or Rhodesia at that time, you mentioned Mr. Sasaki. And was there anything in particular that he was teaching you, or did he have an eclectic background?
So he was a man who could hardly speak English at that time. I have no clue how it's improved today, but I spent at least 6 years of my life with him, and that was in the days of when martial arts were serious stuff. So we were taught throwing, falling, all what you would call classic Japanese jiu-jitsu today. But we were also taught striking and weapons and so on.
Right.
And all of that taught in one curriculum at that time had a huge impact on me and on the way my martial arts was going to be headed.
Right. It's interesting that you say that, because if I look at older jiu-jitsu texts, and I'm talking about specific ryuha that are still classified as jiu-jitsu ryuha, even some that Jigoro Kano studied and mastered before he created the Kodokan and then systemized it into what later became judo, there is striking in there, and they do make reference to weapon work and specifically defense against weapons as well. So it's not extraordinary. What you're saying is that Sasaki is probably representative of an older generation of the way these things were practiced.
Yes, absolutely. There's no question.
Well, that's very interesting.
Funny enough, Sasaki had something that's very key to the listeners of this program. He used to say to me, if you ever want to deeply and really understand the martial arts, you have to return to China. He didn't say Japan. He said China. He said it all comes from China, and if you really want to get to the bottom of it, that's where you've got to go. And he wasn't the last person to say that either.
Does make sense, and I've heard that from other Japanese writers. I meant in reading older generation Japanese writers mentioning the same thing. You know, actually, there was a Chinese martial arts teacher that I met here that I've known for a while. His name is irrelevant, but he used to say something to me that was quite. I mean, it was in jest, but it was quite accurate. He'd say that the Japanese today and in general don't really like the Chinese, but they venerate Chinese culture. So
Yes, absolutely correct.
yeah, and that's quite in line with what you said, Sasaki said to you. So going on from that path, I mean, where did it lead you?
So I had developed two interests at the same time, and one was from the movies, which was the good old Kung Fu series that came out in the 70s. David
Carradine.
Carradine
Yeah.
wandering out, and you know.
Yeah.
And at that time, for me, it was a big thing because I was quite a spiritual little guy when I was younger. A spiritual meaning, I love nature. I grew up out in the bush, and the philosophy of Zen or Chan was really what was me, what made me up. And the second thing was a little later on, I think it was about mid-70s or perhaps early 70s. Yeah, it must have been mid-70s. I discovered the ninja.
Okay.
And this had a huge impact on me. Now, just bearing in mind that Rhodesia was at war at that time, and let's not get into war because no one cares about what all that's about. The fact was, it was a reality of my survival to be able to think about a martial art that was at that time was the only one I could recognize directly connected to war. But what interested me was all the thinking behind it, the entire philosophy and thought and preparation behind the ninja and ninjutsu. So I set out on this journey to go off to the Far East, and I was looking out for Shaolin, and I was looking out for the ninja. It eventually became one path, but that was kind of what happened.
Right. I think a lot of I remember being young and also being attracted to what was purveyed or displayed in popular culture about the ninja, and it was something that also, when I was young, drew me actually deeper into wanting to do martial arts as well. In fact, I probably have a book still here from, it was a British, some encyclopedia / book about martial arts, and my mom bought it for me, and I think she gave it to me as my 10, when I turned 10 or 11, a birthday present. And it's she wrote a little inscription in there. I mean, it's quite funny because she wrote in there, "I hope you learn a lot from this book, and maybe one day I'll be the proud mother of a ninja." I still have that book. Yeah, it affected me too. So sorry, I digress. So you carried on.
No.
Carry on from where you left off. Where did that lead you?
Okay, so I guess we jump forward a little bit. So 1987, the beginning of 1987, it could have been late 1986. I can't put a date on it exactly. I head off to the Far East, and I decide to land in Hong Kong on the China coast.
Right.
And my first port of call was going to be Shaolin. So there I land in the Far East. I get myself kind of, I don't want to say established, but I get my feet on the ground, and I've got to get to Shaolin. And first of all, there was no Shaolin. That was probably the single greatest shock of my life. There was no Shaolin. We turned up to find basically overgrown buildings. There was grass growing on the roof, I kid you not. And there was one cleaner who wasn't even keeping the place clean.
Yeah.
And that particular fellow is now venerated as one of the abbots, which is totally ridiculous. The place had been crushed. Now, we had to go there slightly illegally. I say slightly illegally because the communist people wouldn't allow any connection with any of that at that time.
Right. This was just after the Cultural Revolution as well.
Yeah. Which and we were treated with great suspicion. I have to tell you that in the same year I returned with my wife, and we were treated very, very strangely, being a Western and Chinese couple, trying to look for things in the martial arts. But that's another story. So with the shock of the Shaolin thing, we pulled back, and blow me down, there was this enormous documentary and presentation done in Hong Kong at almost exactly the same time on Shaolin, and Shaolin was then shown to be completely ridiculous and that it didn't exist, and so on and so on. So it was a huge knock to me, spiritually, and on my journey. I thought it was all there. I thought it was great, and it wasn't.
Right.
The interesting thing was it was about to lead to the next step of my journey, which is one of great research. So, it was what it was. So I thought, okay, well, if that's not around, what am I going to do? And I started, I went off to live in a temple.
Still in Hong Kong?
Small temple.
In Hong Kong?
Yeah, it's down, it's on the outlying islands, and it's in the mountains on the outlying islands, if anybody knows what the topography is like. So I became a monk in a Zen temple, a Chan temple, and I didn't enjoy it. I liked all the pretty girls that were coming into the temple, and I certainly liked meat coming from Zimbabwe. So that was something. And although it's a tongue-in-cheek bit of humor there, it's also the truth. And what deeply affected me was there was no kindness. I had joined the Chan journey for kindness, and there wasn't any. It was nastiness from day one. There was racism from day one.
Really?
So I left the temple never to return.
Okay.
However, there was hermits living in the area, and I went on to live and work and train and research with these hermits for many, many years afterwards. And they became a source of hidden information in the Chinese martial arts that I don't think people have tapped into.
That's interesting to hear. You never hear about hermits when you think of Hong Kong, especially in today's day and age, but never mind today's day and age. It was never a place that you hear about where people would go to find hermits and people living, these lifestyles. You normally think further in the mainland and these famous mountainous areas. So it's very interesting to hear that you found such, and it still exists. I don't know if it still exists, but at least it existed then in those areas.
Well, if you think about it, the Cultural Revolution has a lot to do with it, as you know yourself. And my wife's parents had run away from the Cultural Revolution, so I had a lot of information from them of how it all worked.
Right.
But basically, there was this massive exodus from mainland China, and most people could only get to Hong Kong, if even that.
Yeah.
And so would get to Hong Kong. Today, people picture Hong Kong only as the city center, but actually there's 77 outlying islands. And these outlying islands are, some of them, very mountainous, remote areas, or certainly were at that time. And so these little communities popped up out in the nowhere. And that's, became something interesting to me.
Very interesting. So there were thriving martial arts practices amongst some of these people?
Yes. I have to tell you that in that time, at this point, I was starting to worry about my martial arts career. I'd felt that I'd gone down a terrible path because I was now in the middle of nowhere, but I was on the China coast, and that just didn't make sense. So I was on the search. I needed to find something fantastic, or I was going to be in trouble. So the search began, and it was a vigorous search. I have to tell you that somewhere in all of this, I met my wife. Her Western name is Noelle. And in all of that, I guess we got married in 1987. We decided that had to be quick, because what was I going to disappear to another part of the world? Or, you can't have relationships split.
Right.
So we just got on with it. And Noelle was a lifelong practitioner of Northern Chinese martial arts. She's a tough cookie, tough mind.
Indeed she is.
And but she's a lot like your wife, so you'll know. But anyway, so we go on this journey looking for all the great masters we can find, and I have to tell you, there was none. It was just like a desert. If you saw someone practicing with a spear, it was pathetic. If you saw someone with a sword, it was pathetic. And I started to panic. Sorry, you carry on?
No, I was going to say that what you had also said about the Shaolin Temple when you arrived there being, basically abandoned in a terrible state, it echoes a friend that I've known for quite a while, whose father came to South Africa to teach for the Buddhist temple there. He actually acted in the movie The Shaolin Temple. He portrayed the emperor. And he said when they went to film there, the movie, there was nothing there. So it's, a lot of people think that it had this long, continuous, uninterrupted period of monks and abbots and martial arts. But the truth is, after Shiryo-san burnt the temple to the ground in the Republican era, it was basically abandoned. So...
correct, yes.
Yeah, and that's just, I'm just, relating a story that I'd been told by somebody else.
No, I'm glad you did, because you know how many people don't believe me. They think that whatever's written out there on the internet and whatever's perpetuated by the China government is the absolute truth. And it's part of the problem we have in the martial arts today. It's just bullshit being perpetuated by more bullshit.
Yes. Well, another thing they don't realize is that abbots used to be appointed by the emperor. Well, at least approved by the emperor. So the last abbot that was approved officially was in the Qing dynasty. So this is another interest up until now, more recent times. That's why it's funny for me to hear things like this and this generation abbot and this generation monk. Meanwhile, it was during that period that there was no approval, and actually the temple was abandoned for a long period before that. So, and as you said, people don't believe it.
Yeah, very accurate. Yeah. So, where am I? I've forgotten. So,
you went on a search.
So we were out on the search, and we eventually. It's going to be convoluted because I've now got two parts I've got to talk about. So bear with me. I'm going to stop talking about dates so as to not confuse anyone. Mm-hmm. So I go back to this interest of the ninja and the of Shaolin together. So remember this: we're out looking for a master. We're searching everywhere. We're training with everybody, and there's nothing but horror stories. So we zip off to Japan. And we're in Japan, and we visit Katori Shinto-ryu.
Right.
Famous school, you know it yourself.
Yes.
We both mutually respect it.
Yeah.
And we were very, very fortunate to be received by Sasaki Sensei.
Okay.
And he spent 3 hours with us. And in those 3 hours, were about to change everything that I ever knew and understood about the martial arts in total. That is Japanese and Chinese together. Mm-hmm. Otake Sensei was very generous. He talked to us. He told us things. He wasn't in a hurry. He probably had much better things to do. But Noelle was very key at that moment, and from that moment onwards. At that time, she was very young. I guess probably 21, 22 when we saw him. And she was very sweet, and she'd been brought up in the old traditional way. Right. So she knew exactly how to be polite without being nosy. Right. And this just opened doors.
Etiquette, because, the correct etiquette.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah, I'll be...
And
if I may add something here, it's interesting that you talk about this etiquette and how you, in an older way and specifically in a classical way, how you're supposed to conduct yourself with a teacher when you meet him. And it's funny that you say this because a couple of days ago, I had heard from somebody that I know that and he's not in China, He has a mutual person that we both know that had come to China from overseas with an aim to just look around and meet some teachers. And he contacted me to meet my teacher. And I'm pretty hesitant on introducing people to my teacher that I don't know really well personally. So that's just because that's part of the etiquette, right? So I had heard recently that he had some things to say about that meeting, about my attitude and my teacher, simply because after that meeting I kind of brushed him off. And it was exactly because of his etiquette during the meeting with my teacher that it made me put me in a bad light, but it just made me realize this is not somebody that I'd like to have interaction with my teacher. And it's exactly what you're saying. A lot of people don't understand this etiquette, and they don't understand how you're supposed to conduct yourself, and they don't understand how these older generation teachers don't actually hang on your words, but they're looking for the stuff in between your words to make a judgment on you. So, sorry, I thought I'd add that in there too.
No. I think what you're saying is very, very valuable, and it's something that's lost now. And it's one of the reasons, as you'll see when I get to talk about some of the research we did, it's one of the reasons that so many people didn't take on apprentices to continue their art.
Right.
And much of it has died simply because of that one point.
Right. Very true. So sorry, you were saying about Noelle's role in all of this with Otake Sensei.
Yeah, so she was so clever with it because she's sweet, she was pretty, she was strong, she was a martial artist, but she had this incredible respect. And coming from Zim, I mean, I think your parents are from Zim. You probably know this. We're very respectful people too.
Yes.
And anyway, basically the outcome was that I could push a little bit and she'd apologize for me. And I'd push a little bit and she'd apologize for me. So we got this little rapport going where we could work this whole thing. And Otake Sensei opened the doors. So I've never told anybody this, and I'm very reluctant to say it online, but it's going to need to be said at some point. Otake Sensei started to ask us about ask Noelle specifically, when she reads something in Chinese, what was the meaning? So they went through for about 10, 15, 20 minutes. They talked about a few things, and I just watched and listened to what was going on. Now, bearing in mind, Otake Sensei didn't speak English, and we didn't speak Japanese. So a lot of discussion was happening in kanji, in Chinese characters.
Of course.
So this is how we got onto this subject. Eventually, Otake Sensei started to bring out some very old scrolls. And in those scrolls, we saw things that, some of the things I'll never repeat. He asked us, please just leave it quiet, keep it to yourself. He wanted to ask Noelle how she interpreted the words. And I think it's because she was female, unthreatening through the martial arts scandal, so to speak. She was just this quiet little girl.
Yeah.
And so he asked her, and she was well educated in classic Chinese literature. So everything worked in our favor. We saw things there that changed our lives. And he said to us, because as you know, Kotori Shinto-ryo has the only registered historical documentation of ninjutsu inside a living school.
Right.
So
an authentic one.
Yes, an authentic one, recognized by the Japanese government. So he said to us, if you want this art as a total art, not as a part of Japanese swordsmanship,
right.
If you want the whole art, you have to go to China. It doesn't exist in Japan.
Wow.
And those words were the beginning of the rest of our lives.
Very interesting. So did it lead you to any particular place? Or just was it just general that he mentioned that it's China?
It just said it's China. You have the background of Chinese. This is what I recommend. However, he did get it. He grabbed a little piece of paper and he wrote a few things down. And he said, this will help you start your journey. And that was it. We decided that our lives were not going to be in Japan, not because of what he had said, but economically, we weren't going to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So we decided we will begin the search. And we almost literally went home, packed our bags and set off into mainland China. And from that day on, we started collecting up old manuscripts of martial arts and old artifacts, weapons that that you would never think of, etc., etc. And that became our life of research.
So that was it for you, basically. But before we get on to your next part of your journey, as you mentioned earlier, I have great respect for Katori Shinto-ryu. Did the thought ever cross your mind that you wanted to study Katori?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And in fact, while we were there, Otaki Sensei did accept us as students. We didn't do the Keppan, the blood oath, or anything like that.
Yeah.
But he gave us a formal acceptance. He said to us, if you would like to come and join Katori Shinto-ryu, you're welcome to. Wow. Sorry, that wasn't an invitation. That was a response to us asking. We asked him. We said, can we join?
Right.
And he said, it's a little unusual to do it like this, but yes, based on what I know of you, you can.
Wow.
But in the end, we wrote to him and we said, no, we won't be able to do that.
Right. I mean, Don Draeger has such an influence on the Western introduction to and basic exposure to Katori Shinto-ryu, and that was his life's journey before his untimely death. So, and I don't think a lot of the current generation of martial artists actually realized that impact that had, and his whole thing. Yeah.
You're absolutely right. That's a big chunk of the development of the Western world's martial arts came through Don Draeger.
Yeah.
And now we just kind of dismiss it like it didn't exist.
Yeah, exactly.
And Otaki Sensei, he spoke to us about Don Draeger, and he spoke with huge affection for him.
Really?
And tears were in his eyes when he spoke of him.
Wow.
So,
well,
it was something.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, of course. I mean, he was basically mind, body, heart, and soul into Katori. So, yeah, it's understandable.
Yes.
Yeah. So, sorry, getting sidetracked again. So then you went off into mainland and started doing your research, and through that path and that time.
So just bear in mind, there's two prongs here. We were looking for a master, and now we'd head off into China, and we'd do that ongoing. So let me say we eventually find a master, and his name was, in Mandarin pronunciation, Kwan Run Chang.
Okay.
Excuse my pronunciation. I'm Cantonese speaking.
Right.
So Guan Sifu became our master. We did a formal 20-year contracted apprenticeship with him. In other words, before we started the apprenticeship. And there was a couple of reasons for that, for going with Guan Sifu, but he was the only real warrior we could ever find. People were absolutely terrified of him. We were told, don't go near him. He's nasty. He's powerful. He's this thing. And we found nothing but an honorable, decent, kind man that for the next 22 years, I think it was, he just gave us his all, absolutely his all. And we never found any of the legends or whatever you want to say, the scandal to be true. He was wonderful.
Maybe the others were just threatened by his skill and his personality, that they just decided to paint him as black as they could. It happens.
Yes. He was extremely traditional. So like your Sifu, he was extremely traditional or tradition orientated. So he wanted people to address him politely. He wanted to address others politely.
Yeah.
He wanted martial artists to conduct themselves properly, not to conduct themselves in fighting,
Right.
etc., etc., etc. You know, and these modern day people, talking about that time,
Yeah.
were threatened by that. The wushu was coming in. China was promoting the sport of wushu, and people wanted to go that route instead. And why do I want to call him Sifu? Who the hell does he think he is?
Right. Yeah. Agreed. I haven't seen him.
And I had the opposite feeling. I said, no, I do want to call him Sifu because he is my teacher, or he is a teacher, and I will learn from him, you know?
Yeah. And where was this? Any particular place?
So Guan Sifu actually lived in Singapore,
Okay.
and we lived in Hong Kong. But Guan Sifu had a sister in Hong Kong.
Okay.
So he was forever in Hong Kong, and through our earning bread and butter, we had to go to Singapore quite often too. So we were either there or he was with us, and that's how it became our thing.
Well, that's a serious study. 20 years of studying under somebody, and what was that like?
Grueling. I think the psychology of it in the beginning was the hardest, because we actually made a blood oath. We put blood on an oath to say one life, one teacher.
Right.
And to give ourselves to that, and to know that it was 20 years ahead of us. The 20 years ahead of you is a bizarre, is like you say, you enter an apprenticeship today, it's a 3-year,
Right.
4-year apprenticeship, and you go, that's a long time.
Yeah.
When you are younger and you hear 20 years, you just go, what?
It's like almost as long as you've been alive, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And but the funny thing was, the 20 years passed, and now I don't know what happened to it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad too. But anyway,
And
so it was a psychological barrier.
right.
And he made us work hard, and he was a stickler for detail. Everything was in the details, and we're now the same. Everything is in the details when we teach people,
Sure.
because it is in the details.
Of course it is. I mean, that's what gives an art its depth. What was it? A particular system that he was teaching? I mean, is it something that you're open to talk about?
Yes, I will. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have, but I do now. Guan Sifu was at the Chin Wu school. So when I heard of him, he was at Chin Wu, and I thought, okay, this is not terribly exciting for me.
Yeah.
So what we discovered was their age group, many people had joined Chin Wu as I don't know what to say, like a brotherhood. And they hadn't joined Chin Wu in the sense of their martial arts.
Oh, I see.
And I was later to find that out, that his lineage, his master was in Chin Wu. He's very active in Chin Wu, and he helped and so on. But they had these two things. They had their external training, which was at Chin Wu, and they had their closed door training, which they had separately to that.
Right.
And it wasn't exclusive to our lineage. It was
Pretty common.
it was quite, it was common.
That sounds more like the original idea of the formation of Jinwu, which collected different people from different styles with different methods, just working towards a goal.
Yes, agreed. And interestingly, later on, we would have access to the whole Chin Wu record, which is thousands upon thousands of books and documents and manuscripts. And that's exactly what is said inside those documents, which I know you know.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Once, to answer your question, Guan Sifu in the open practice would practice Shaolin.
Okay.
And they called it Northern Shaolin, Baxiulam.
Yeah.
So, but the description is specifically Shaolin from the north compared to Shaolin from the south. It doesn't matter who thinks what, whether there is a southern or a northern.
Right.
It doesn't matter. That's how they labeled it.
Yeah.
So it was northern martial arts of the Shaolin stream.
Okay.
And one of the reasons we would become so attracted and interested in him is he had collected many of the old manuscripts that had been passed on. And this was the way we were thinking. We were thinking if we ever want to get to the bottom of real martial arts, we've got to get back in time somehow. And we can only do that through manuscripts.
Right.
And as you know yourself, there's very little written by martial artists.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So it became quite a study, and it's been many years on the study. Anyway, that's another story. Inside his closed door lineage was this other type of martial art, and we were to later discover that Yin Fa, which is the same as the ninja art, ninpo or ninjutsu, existed, but it didn't exist in its entirety.
Okay.
So we were interested to learn that and to discover what needed to be fulfilled.
Yin, when you say,
people,
sorry, but just for the listeners, Yin as in the character Yin from Yin and Yang, right?
No, as in the character to hide.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Hide or hidden or concealed.
Or dark, which is indeed, the concept within Yin and Yang's Yin. So it's concealed.
Correct.
As in Yang would be more Ming or bright, Yin would be shady or concealed. Yeah, okay. Got it. So that makes sense.
But it's not that character, right?
Sure.
It's the character for hide.
Okay.
So just to clarify.
Yeah.
But yes, I agree with your understanding. So what we were very interested to discover was right up until 1926 that these hidden arts were, and if you don't mind, I'm going to call them that, these hidden arts were still operating quite energetically.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was dead. Bang, like a chopper had come down on the chopping block and it was over. But we also discovered that that's what happened to true martial arts. True Chinese martial arts stopped. Bang. 1926, 1930, somewhere around there, someone turned the light off and that was it. And the rest is just a throwback, and we all get dribbles of what we think is true Chinese martial arts.
So that was within his system, this Yin Fa, and Fa is in method, correct? Just to clarify.
Yes. But just for me to clarify, but not the entire system.
Right. Okay. So just a portion of it, and the rest of his system that he was teaching. And I mean, what did you focus on? Everything within his closed inside training lineage, or did you focus on?
Yes, we had to,
right.
And that's why we were given the 20 years. We had to do everything. We were not allowed to choose. We were not allowed to make anything better than something else. We had to do the whole damn thing.
Okay.
So, at the top of our family tree, if you want to call it that, on the lineage, I don't like this lineage thing, so bear with me when I speak of it.
Right.
So there are 4 particular people. To the top left is a Shaolin monk, who was what they called a cloud water monk. He roamed around. He's itinerant. He roamed around.
Okay.
And then there was 3 other fellows, and their input seemed vague until later on we discovered that a lot of that was extremely violent, nasty martial arts. And that was used for the bodyguard, the bodyguard trains and whatnot.
Right.
And all of the three sort of nasty guys, it was all weapons and knives and nasty little things.
Yes, would be for sure.
And the Shaolin fellow was to balance all of that and to give some spiritual, dare I say, mental perspective to the violence.
Right.
Just to balance people, because they felt it was important that you have this balance, and I think it's important too.
So you don't become a psychopath, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's what's happening in today's world with all the MMA. Everybody's becoming fighting psychopaths.
Yes, well, you
This
can
is not
see it with the
martial arts
egos.
anymore.
Yeah, you can see it with the egos and attitudes and personalities that are not only, you know, it's kind of like the one thing is feeding the other though in the in that environment. Because sure, a lot of people might get into it without having that mindset and might be doing it even if you go further back in the beginnings of the whole MMA thing. Some people might have done it just out of purely trying to test themselves, trying to push themselves. But in order to make it in today's MMA environment, if you don't have all that hype and drama and whatever, well, then you're not going to be popular. And if you're not popular, you're not going to get the fights. And if you don't get the fights, you don't get the money. So it kind of like the one feeds the other, if you know what I mean. And then in order to stay relevant, you have to become so dramatic, and then the more dramatic you become, it sets the tone for how everybody else is going to start acting, and it just keeps, it's like a race to the bottom in fact.
Yes.
So
No, I agree with that.
that's a very sad thing. But sorry, carry on with your discussion about your system.
I guess for now that's probably where we should leave that one and move forward.
Okay.
So Guanxi, for teaching us martial arts, was or that system of martial arts was physically developmental, mentally developmental, and spiritually. But it became obvious, absolutely crystal clear obvious, that the original martial arts had no interest in Yin Fa, if I pronounce Mandarin correctly, unarmed combat. Unarmed combat is just a thing that developed during what we call the Kung Fu era.
Okay.
So the mid to late Qing dynasty type interest. Actually, before that, it's all weapons. It's all about killing. And that's why martial arts are not used, because you can't just go out and pull your knives out and slash someone up. That's just not cool.
Well, you will go to jail today. That's it.
Yes.
Yeah. And you can't even
And
walk
your
around.
family will be executed and so on.
Yeah, and you can't even walk around with that stuff in any case nowadays. So it makes it even...
Oh, sorry. Nowadays, yes, absolutely correct.
Yeah.
So we were spending our lives digging around. So Guanxi was very cool because he liked the fact that we did research, which is very unlike a lot of other masters or teachers who don't want you to look around.
Yeah, or even ask questions.
Yes, absolutely. He understood that we wanted answers, and he was overjoyed with it because he would tell us himself how the techniques had been changed in his lifetime. He would say, we used to do this, we used to kick like this, but now we kick like this. And the reason is, and then he would explain that they basically were trying to water everything down.
Right.
And when I would ask, why are they watering it down? He couldn't even answer me. He said, I don't know. That's just what people were trying to do at that time. And luckily for us, for Noel and I and our students, he never did water it down. And so we've gone the long, hard road.
Right.
So while we were researching, he was very happy with that. And we would come home with these documents, and he would help us find documents. And even more interestingly, he opened up a whole network for us. And those people were very keen on Noella and I being the next generation, so interested in the research. Many of them came forward to us. I mean, we must have interviewed hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of old-time martial artists who would give us their words, but their writings, and in some cases old documents, in a couple of cases even old weapons. And it became just a whole thing. And if anything, that's probably been the greatest part of our life, has been the research.
Well, that's one of the things that, I mean, when I first met you, struck me about your wealth of knowledge and research into these things. And I know that you don't always, I mean, you don't openly show a lot of it, and you don't discuss a lot of it, and for obvious reasons. But yeah, that, I mean, you've got a depth of knowledge. Obviously, this experience of yours is through these years, but you've got a depth and a wealth of knowledge there that very few have.
I think so. And thank you for saying that. But let me tell you why I don't talk about it. I don't talk about it very often because everybody's in today's world, everybody knows everything. We've been led to believe that we get on the internet and the answers are all there.
Yeah.
We look at anything, I don't know, it could be Xingyi, it could be Shaolin, it could be anything, and we already know the answers because there it is. And if it's a Chinese guy doing it, then that's definitely the answer.
Yeah, true.
So I don't say anything. Even in the world of the ninja, so Noel and I eventually discovered the origin of the ninja. That's actually what we set out to do, was to discover the origin of the ninja. And it's Chinese. Of course it's Chinese. Where else would it be?
Right.
And it goes so far back. We're talking about probably 3000 BC.
Wow.
And the evidence is there in writing. It's not me saying it. It's there. It's written. It's still recorded, but no one has been looking for it.
Right.
So we've come up with perlers, like this particular thing that I'm giving you as an example. But we've come up with even techniques. We've discovered writings on certain techniques that when you read the writing, after that, you can never go back to the other way. You understand clearly what they meant and the difference that it makes.
Yeah.
So we found you can't tell modern people that. They're not interested.
Yeah.
Everybody already knows something. They look at a video and they mock the next guy doing a spear, or they look at a video and they mock someone doing a sword, and yet themselves are just disgusting.
Well, that's the biggest problem. That's the biggest problem with the internet culture today. I mean, it's one thing to give to state something with regards to a discussion about the positive and negative of a certain performance. But it's another thing doing that when you yourself have zero ability in what you're talking about. So, and that's where we're sitting today. Everybody has a voice, but not everybody has the skill. So
absolutely, yes, very good words.
Yeah.
But the thing is, the people coming into the martial arts world have no clue who to listen to anymore.
Yeah.
And
confusing.
This has become a major problem. I have a very nice fellow that I know who started teaching martial arts. Now, okay, so what? Well, he never actually learnt any. I don't want to say too much because it might point in his direction, and I'm not that type of person.
Right.
But he started teaching, to my shock and horror, and he's never, ever had a master, someone teach him. It's all been silly stuff, and here he's teaching. And he's teaching stuff that will damage the body.
Yeah.
So
very common.
It just leaves me speechless. Yeah, it is. And it's scary, man.
Yeah. And the average Joe out there doesn't know. He doesn't know the difference. And the other side of it is you can just make yourself look really good on the internet with catchy designs and things like that, and then the average Joe wouldn't know. And once he's started getting into it, it's too late. Never mind, it's never too late to change and learn, but you'll never get the years you've lost back, and that for me is the big tragedy.
Absolutely true. Yeah. And we've also seen the other side of it, and I'm sure you're aware of this too, is you get involved into something and you discover later on that this particular journey or path is not going to take you where you want to go. But then you never leave it because now you don't want to lose the work that you've put in.
Well, even worse than that is exactly what you've said about these people that just start basing their livelihood on whatever it is that they started learning prematurely. So in other words, they started teaching it as a way of living, or even they might have started training with that in mind. Who's to say? And then once they realize that there's something wrong further down the road, instead of being honest not only with the people that they're teaching, but with themselves, they'd rather just carry on, put the blinkers on, and just keep going down that path. So
yes, absolutely. And that's happening all over. And strangely, as much as I I don't say I don't like MMA, but let's just go with my words. I don't like MMA. I don't like what it's brought.
Yeah.
But one of the things I do like is that MMA has woken a certain amount of people up to the fact that what they're doing is bullshit.
Yes, true. Very true.
And I do think that that's been vital. But there's a balance between suddenly what's happened is there's a witch hunt and that all Chinese martial arts is bullshit. And that's not true at all.
Well,
Chinese martial arts is incredible.
Right.
But we need to start looking backwards now and discover what it is that we personally haven't learned, you know.
Exactly so. So people get so polarized and then they get so invested in what it is, whether it be MMA, which is the thing today, or something else in another point previously, that then if anything would threaten that point of view, it's a problem for them. That's why they've got to be like, it's either the best or it's the worst, you know? And that's it's very hard. But nothing works like that in nature. Nothing works like that in reality. So, you know.
No, you're right.
Very, very hard. So, well,
you know.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry.
No, you go.
No, you go, please.
Well, I was gonna get.
So I was just gonna say.
I love the internet lag. No, you're gonna go. I'm gonna keep quiet. Go. Go ahead.
So I was just going to say, people mock the Chinese martial arts, and you know yourself that I throw Fabial.
Yeah.
So I've practiced Fabial for many years. I throw Fabial, for anyone who doesn't know, that's Chinese darts, if you want to call it that. It's all kinds of throwing weapons. Mm-hmm. In ancient times, it was one of the key weapons. Almost everybody threw Fabial. Today, almost nobody throws Fabial.
Right.
Sorry, I'm pronouncing this in the Cantonese method. Fei Biao, I think, is Mandarin.
Fei
you know
Biao.
better than I do.
Yeah, for sure.
So when people say to me, if you get in a martial arts MMA ring, you're going to get wiped out. Not if I got my Fei Biao with me, thank you.
But see,
the guy won't even get out of the corner. So
he'll be on his bench and he'll be dead.
Exactly, and it's a ridiculous comment.
Yeah. Well,
but
it's perspective.
At the same time, I must.
It's just a single perspective that they're just extrapolating on. That's the issue.
Yes.
So.
But at the same time, I must also respect the MMA guy, because he gets out there and he punches and whacks and kicks and throws, and he does all the things to develop himself in total because he has to use it.
Right.
And I have to compliment that compared to the guy who does a form and never learns anything.
Exactly.
It's just a form.
Exactly.
And yet he will go and say some fancy chi is going to knock you 10 feet in the air. It's not.
Exactly as you've just said. So it's all of this bubble polarization, you know? And
yes,
that's the problem. I wanted to talk about Fabian, and I'm going, if you don't mind, you've got a very informative video that you created that in my mind has barely received the attention that it should receive. But that's how the internet goes, you know? It seems to be that the stronger the smell of bullshit, the more people smell it. So the stuff that doesn't stink seems to just go unnoticed. So what I will put a link to it in the show notes here. But was that part of your the Yin Fa that you were mentioning, that training? Is that Fabian part of that, or is it a more pervasive? Okay, it is. Okay.
Sorry, let me let you answer your question. Is it more pervasive to what? To all Chinese martial arts?
No, to your system as a whole, or is it specified in a specific context?
No, I can tell you there are certain Fabian that are Yin Fa orientated. Things that can be hidden away, they're thrown at long distance, they've got poison, etc., etc. And there's another sort of more general, pervasive set of Fabian, which is the one which is what's generally mentioned in the video that I made. That sort of is for everybody's viewing. Everybody who practiced Chinese martial arts should know, or in the old days should have known those type of techniques.
Right. You mentioned poison. I mean, that's obviously when people take a step back and look at this issue of when we talk about, well, Fei Biao, flying projectile, and then taking a step even further back and looking at a piercing weapon, whether it be held in the hand or thrown or concealed in one way or the other, the logical next step would be to utilize poison. I mean, that especially if we're taking it out of today's modern society context and taking it back to the environment that, society was in way back when, just even 150, 200, 300 years ago. That's the logical direction one would go. So it's also quite interesting to me to see, for example, today when they talk about, some unique weapons in Chinese martial arts, and they talk about the Ome Needles, which are those needles attributed to Ome, and they're held in the hands. They've got a ring on them, which usually is put on the middle finger, depending on the version. Some are put on the index finger, some are put on the ring finger. But and it's a needle with two points on it. That is, well, nowadays there's very fancy demonstrations with them spinning in the hands, but and the if you look at the information, they talk a lot about these were made famous by women. They were used by women. But when you told me that, when people tell me that, the first thing that comes to mind is, first of all, women, much like a lot of the concepts in Chinese martial arts, they're not going to fight strength against strength. That's the first thing that I would understand. And the second thing, that a concealed needle would make perfect sense. But then the third step would be, then there should be poison involved. So that's just me thinking out loud when I hear this. But maybe you can shed some light on your thoughts on this.
Well, you've hit every part of it straight on the head. If you do the research into history, we discover that needles are widespread, male and female, but female more because they could carry it in hidden ways on their dress. So, for example, let's just use the hairpin.
Right.
So they could easily dress themselves with a hairpin. Yes, men could do that too, but we'd have to go back 2,000 years to discover that period of time. But women have been able to wear it all the way up and into the Qing dynasty. So a hairpin and the Ome needles that you're talking about, all the same sort of things, and tipped with poison. This is why in the old days there was so many traditions of manner, because you wouldn't just approach somebody, even a small petite woman or a girl, because she might have either a set of claws on her fingers with poison on the tips, or something in her hair also with poison, and all it takes is one little prick and you're dead. So you don't just rush in and kill someone. You don't rush in and hurt them.
Right.
You stop 2 meters away and you bow. And actually, if you dig around on the internet and you go back to Beijing's early videos, you can see people bowing in the streets of Beijing to each other
I've seen
and keeping
that.
a distance of around that,
And it's repetitive
social
bowing.
distancing.
It's too, social distancing sans COVID-19. But I've seen that video, and it's repetitive bowing as well. And that was just late Qing dynasty. So
yes, exactly.
Very interesting. And what you mentioned about nails is and females' nails, for me, has always been something, probably because I'm a martial arts lunatic, ever from years ago, that I've always had the concept that the general global culture of women growing their nails stems from some form of something that they probably had at some point in their in the history of females, that they wore as a defensive, something for defense, but that became an artistic element of their daily dress. And it's just evolved into long fingernails today, and people have forgotten that. So
absolutely correct. And that's where we get this whole thing of, I'm going to use the stupid word ninja claws, because that's what everyone says on the internet. But all of these things were Chinese weapons, standard, everyday Chinese weapons. And you had to carry them because the penalties of having no weapon or no understanding of defending yourself was death.
Yeah.
And so people would carry claws. So if you see a Shaolin thing where, oh, this is the tiger, it's not the bloody tiger. It's a form where the guy would have a whole set of claws in his hands.
Well, see, that makes more sense. Yeah, of course. Of course that makes sense. But we do get to a point somewhere, though, that creating body weapons became a thing too. But that's a specific point in time.
Okay, so can I relate a little story here?
Sure.
So I was in the streets of Hong Kong, walking down the road, and I'd been practicing Yin Fa, unarmed combat, or fist, whatever you guys want to say. I can't stand the word Chinese boxing.
Yeah.
So I'd been practicing that for some years. I'd had a couple of scraps in the streets of Hong Kong, and I hadn't been winning. I'd been losing. But what upset me, and I'd say upset me, deeply spiritually upset me, was the fight would always end up in swinging fists, flying kicks, flying not as in beautifully flying. I'm talking about
Wild.
just whirling around like idiots.
Yeah.
And the whole thing was a mess. And I was deeply upset that the systematic concept was not working. However, there's one difference to me than most people. I always felt it was my fault that I hadn't developed my skill enough.
Right.
And so one day, here I am walking along, and this fellow comes out. We're in a very tight area in Causeway Bay, and this fellow comes out of a steep, narrow stairway with a ladder on his shoulder and a toolbox in the other hand. And he swings into the street, hits a Japanese lady with the ladder. She flies in front of a taxi, almost gets killed.
Oh no!
And I, as he passes me, I sort of swear at him. He drops everything, and he grabs my throat with those weapons that you just mentioned earlier on. He grew his nails as weapons.
Right.
And they tore the flesh of my throat. Oh, it was agony, absolute agony. I remember freezing at the pain as it happened.
Wow.
Okay, so just to finish off, luckily it was one of the best lessons of my life, because I caught him in a particular method that had been taught to me, and I struck him in a method that had been taught to me, and that was it. It was over. One strike.
Wow.
And it was over. Exactly how the text had said it.
Right.
At that moment, I can tell you, I understood what is the original meaning of Yin Fa.
Okay.
Not what we have today, where people hold up some sort of boxing stance and bop and weave.
Right.
It works, and I just tell anybody who's listening, it works. You've just got to practice and practice and practice.
Right. Well, practice correctly.
Only with correct. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It works only under certain rules.
For sure.
So the reason I wanted to relate that story was twofold. Was one, you'd mentioned people using and developing unarmed weapons. So that fellow had developed his nails. And for me, I ended up using Yin Fa. In fact, that particular technique was a Shaolin technique.
Okay, very good. Well, I want to go back a little bit, if I may. When we were discussing the whole idea of your Fei Biao, then we moved on to the needles. And as you mentioned, women being able to carry them more easily back in older times. And even today, it's probably simpler for a woman to get away with a concealed weapon than it would be for a man. But does this fall into this Yin Fa method? I mean, how prominent were women within that tradition? Because that would be that would be an advantage for sure.
So I'm going to answer your question because it's specific. You're specific. How prominent were women in this Yin Fa? And I'm just going to use the general word as ninja. The answer is very, very prominent. However, there is a great split. There is a military application which was used on the northern border.
Okay.
And there is a civil, or let's say city-based environment where women operated more in the city-based than in the military aspect of the northern border,
Okay.
just to separate the two.
So you'd say that maybe women would be more akin to assassins and other types of work, and whereas with official border etc. would be more in the lines of what we'd call today covert ops or espionage.
As a general comment to your answer, I'd say yes.
Okay.
But both existed in both environments, so men and women in both environments. But clearly on the border and the special ops type operations that were happening, especially during the Tang to the Ming dynasty, those were predominantly men, but there were women used. And in the civil environment, a lot of women were used, but there were some men used, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
So it just reversed numbers.
Could I ask you, I mean, this has just popped into my head as an idea. Maybe you have some info, maybe it's a crazy idea. Is there a correlation between these types of women and the advent of men portraying women in opera? Is there something there? Because, Chinese opera, a lot of the time the female roles were played by men dressed up as women.
Yes. I'm acknowledging your comment. Yes, men dressed up as women. I have never, ever researched that. I must be honest. I don't know the answer to that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's just something, because it would be interesting to know what was the catalyst for this type of a... I'm sure there's a whole bunch of things since then, but maybe there is some sort of a connection. Anyway, something to think about.
So what are you digging at? You want to know more about the woman in the history of things?
Well, I want to know, obviously there's an advantage, which we know, of women doing this type of work in those societies. And then would there be a crossover with men acting as women to do the same thing, to come across as women, but to do the same work? And then how is that possibly related to what was going on or portrayed or that occurred into Chinese opera with men portraying women? It might be nothing.
So historically, I can tell you that women were used in all forms of espionage and assassin and so on, those type of roles, because they can access certain places much easier than men can. Simple. It was the same then as it is now.
Right.
Transvestites were used.
Okay.
And we have historical record of that. But I have to say, cannot recall reading something about a man dressing up as a woman just off the top of my head. That is worth researching, and I will actually look at that.
Okay. Well, I'd be keen to hear what you find.
Okay.
Well, carrying on from let's try to get back on. I want to talk a little bit more about your training, if I may. And I was trying to tie into this whole idea of the needles and the fabiao and then the poison. Surely there would have been this aspect handed down within your tradition as well, of recipes.
Yes. Yes.
And is that still fairly common today? Is it not very well known?
No, it's not well known. People just think now. Most people I talk to, even the old folks, seem to think that it was all a myth and that it was only portrayed by the movies. But in actual fact, it's very, very real.
Okay.
And the use of poisons was extremely common.
Yeah.
My own mother-in-law recounts stories of people dying of poisons.
Right. Well, we had, I think it was, when was it? 10 years ago? That there was somebody within the cabinet of the then Ukrainian president who was a spy or a foreign double agent or something that was poisoning him on a daily basis. I don't know if you remember that. And the guy's face.
Yes.
Yeah. So it even happens today and people don't realize it. So.
Yes, no, you're right. And there was also those two women in Malaysia that bumped off the bloke from Korea, if I'm not mistaken.
The brother of the current president of North Korea.
Yeah, something to that effect. Anyway, I've forgotten the whole story.
Right. And there again, it was a woman, which is interesting.
Correct.
Interesting. Well,
correct.
What other aspects of your learnings with your teacher? What if anything that comes to mind with regards to your journey and your learning there?
You're talking about personal experiences or something that's of more wider interest?
Up to you. I'm interested in your path and your journey.
So one of my pet interests is also running roofs and walls.
Okay.
So
and I've seen Onyx doing that in a couple of videos, and she seems to be getting really good at it.
Yes, correct.
So Onyx is...
So she's only 10 years old now.
Right. So for the listener, that's Mr. Khan's daughter. Very good.
And so we brought Onyx up from day one. And when I say day one, we have pictures of her in her little walker using a gun, a star.
I've seen it.
And so she's grown up with it, and we don't want her to know anything except that. As you know, right now in South Africa, there's this quite a horror story going on with the COVID-19 and so on. We've got crime all around us, and we want our daughter skilled as she can be.
Of course.
So running roofs and walls is a Chinese, people think it's a ninja thing, ninja being Japanese, but actually it's all back to Chinese. And one of the recent things that we found very interesting was that this skill of running walls was widely used. So just going back, you said tell your stories. So we had to practice running roofs and walls in the darkness in Hong Kong.
Wow.
And let me tell you, it raised suspicion. Eh? So,
I can imagine. They must have thought this foreigner is here as a cat burglar.
Noelle and I would talk about, we'd go between two narrow walls and we'd be practicing the gecko skill. I don't know if you're familiar with these things, but there's one called gecko swimming and gecko running the wall and so on. So we would go there and we'd be talking about this, and the poor bloke would be coming home into his little alleyway entrance to his home, and he'd see us sort of halfway up the building. What the heck are these people doing? And the next thing, the cops would turn up and we'd have to explain our way out of it. So it had its funny moments, but it's very real and it's worth learning. People, like I see people now teaching Kung Fu as forms. And they say, but you have to teach forms because everything comes from forms.
Right.
I don't teach forms almost at all. And we have no time to even consider teaching forms. It's the other way around. And one of the things that people say, Chinese martial arts, traditional Chinese martial arts is dying. And I can't get enough students and so on. When you teach kids, if you teach kids running roofs and walls, now, obviously, you don't start kids up on the roof. It's nothing like that.
Yeah.
But you start them inside a school. They're learning off tables, as you've seen my kids do.
Right, obstacle courses.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
You can grow your martial arts school in such a big way. You can create such an interest in traditional martial arts.
For sure.
And it all comes from an old skill of running roofs and walls.
But you can't teach kids forms. I mean, they don't have the attention span for it.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And we've tried. We've done it as experiments to see, is there a certain age that their mind develops into being able to do forms? And the answer is no. Forms are torture. If you try and teach a kid at any age forms, they don't like it. 15, 16, they might want to learn one or two. But just talking about naturally, of course, you see 4-year-olds doing beautiful forms, but that's not the normal.
Right.
That's some poor bastard who's
being tortured.
down and told.
He's being tortured.
Yeah. But if you tell a child, okay, listen, mate, you see this wooden table, you're going to do an aerial, you're going to fly off this thing, you're going to land on a mat, you can land any way you want. Let me tell you, you'll have a school full of kids having a great time and learning something.
Right, I hear you. For sure, I think the approach to teaching martial arts, but also the packaging and the structuring of martial arts, I'm not interested myself in the business side of it, because for me, martial arts was never about, I'm going to start teaching. I do understand that at some point people will need to teach and there is obviously a need for it as well, just with regards to the continuation of an art. But I think a lot of the times the way that it's structured and put together is part of the reason for it not becoming popular. You do get people that are chasing forms. For the life of me, I can't understand that, because like yourself, the basis upon which Xingyiquan, my particular art, and even the Bagua that I learned from my teacher, is not on forms. It's on the repetition of set skills and techniques, one by one after the other, continuously. So even in my own practice, on a daily basis, once I get through all of that, that can go up to 2 hours, just that. Then when are you're going to start doing forms after that? So for me, forms, even though we have them in our system, they're not as crucial, and they're there just more like a reference book that I pull things out of if need be, that you can use as a collection of individual techniques that you can use as a reference point. It's not necessary, but that's what can be done. So there's not much time for that either. I just go through the motions so I can just keep it fresh in one way or the other.
Absolutely. And I love the way you said the word reference book, because there have been times when someone asked me something about Shaolin or whatever, and exactly how I use it, like a reference book.
Right. Well,
I probably do a pretty lousy form, to be honest.
I think, once again, you're underestimating. It depends on whose eyes are looking at it. So that's... but that's the thing, I was thinking about this in a way to explain it to people in a more logical and deeply meaning way. And the only thing that I could say is that martial arts is a language of the body. So if martial arts is a language that exists within your body, it's outside of words. So a book is not going to be a written book as much as it is going to be a physical book. And that's for me what the logic in how they collected these, especially if it was an illiterate society. You can't write down a series of techniques. And maybe I teach 30 or 40 techniques, but the guy forgets 10 of them. Whereas if I put them in a systemized way into a form, even though we're going to practice them separately, the form is the reference book. It's a living, bodied book. And people can't understand that because we're so used to being able to read a book. We can read, or we can write. Even today, we can video it. But go back 200 years when somebody in a society where a lot of people couldn't read or write, it's going to die with him unless he did something like this. So it's quite ingenious, actually. And it goes across language barriers too. So it's irrespective of the two people's language that they speak. This language is the same. Well, it should be.
Yes.
But unfortunately, it's been taken away from being a means to an end, and it's become the end. So for everybody now, it's all about just the forms and collecting forms, whereas it's supposed to be a toolbox. That's what it's supposed to be. So.
Agreed. And it's all got to have some very fancy movement involved, and this is how you generate power, and so on, and so on, and so on.
Right.
Yeah. For me, that's all off the track.
Well, for sure.
Poison doesn't need developing power.
True. Well, firstly, your teacher, as far as I remember, he's passed on. He's
correct.
And apart from you and Noel, was there anybody else that had gone and studied as deeply with him?
There have been people that have practiced with him on the external, outside the door, but we are the only closed-door students that ever were, and he made that known publicly.
Really? And how? What was the reaction from the... you and I both know the... I hate to say it, the unfortunate xenophobia and racism that exists within not only Chinese societies to some form or another, but definitely within the martial arts. What was the reaction to that?
Okay, so that's a story on its own, and I think it's pertinent if I tell the story, because a lot of people are making claims that I can now debunk if I may. So the story is this: when we met Guan Sifu, he himself was happy to teach us. He he's a Buddhist fellow, and he was a very cool guy, as we already said. So he was quite happy, but the surrounding community were absolutely incensed.
Really?
So Guan Sifu said to us, "Would you, when you're around, can you train at Chin Wu just so we can be together?"
Yeah.
And so we did that, and the Chin Wu people hated us. And I tell you, hate us. Gee whiz, you cannot begin to imagine the hatred
Sure.
and the jealousy and the nastiness. And it's petty because, I mean, who cares whether you learn to kick or punch, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, I also noticed at Chin Wu was the horrific attitude towards beginners. People would come off the street, Chinese people come off the street and ask to learn. And they were treated by the brothers and sisters at Chin Wu in just such a horrific manner. So many times did I see newbies in tears because of the insults. Oh, you look like shit. You kick like shit. You da-da-da, all things like this. And that's not how you teach someone.
Yeah, for sure.
So, but that whole attitude existed there. So eventually we just said, we're not coming there. We just do the private stuff or we don't.
Right.
So we trained with him in private for the next 20 years. However, he had to make things public.
Yeah.
As you know, the tradition is like that. You have to say, this person is my apprentice. This is what's going on.
Right.
And he and we suffered for the next 25 years. And if I return to the Far East now to those same type of people, it still exists today. It's still the hatred, still the jealousy.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's awful. And I don't know why. I don't have much explanation as to why.
Yeah, well, that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate.
It's just people. People are such idiots, you know.
So how long after he had passed did you decide to leave, Hong Kong and the Far East?
So we left the Far East while he was still alive. We'd finished our 20 years, but we'd left the Far East, and our plan of action was to get Guan Sifu to start teaching around the world, try and spread some things, use modern people's ideas connected with the old people, like you do. So we came out to South Africa. South Africa for many reasons. That's another story.
Right.
And just after we arrived here, he died.
Oh.
And he died from an accident. He was going up a flight of stairs and he slipped. He fell backwards.
Ooh.
And the stair edge hit him exactly in the right spot in the head, and he was instantly dead.
Oh, that's terrible.
And yeah, it was a shock. I can remember at age 75, the last time we had dinner with him, I had slapped him on the shoulder, and it was just like this block of iron. It's just solid. Dong.
At 75.
And I can remember thinking, yeah, at 75. And I can remember thinking to myself, if I can only be something like that, I will. It's a goal for me to work towards. And he ran off, 75. He ran off to the distance, believe it or not, because he was scared to be late for his wife. But something's never changed.
Nothing changes. Nothing changes. That's not called being a soft martial artist. That's called being an intelligent martial artist. If you're married to a Chinese wife.
Yeah. So very fond memories of that type of thing.
Well, coming back to his, you mentioned how solid he was, and that was one of the things that you influenced me quite heavily on, was the conditioning side of things. And I mean, was that handed down to you from him, or was that a path that you had gone on from before him that he just further, reinforced, or?
No, that was handed down from him. He actually said to us, if you don't want to condition, you don't have to, but you will never have the martial arts.
That's quite true.
You must decide whether you want to do martial arts for exercise or whether you actually want to do it. And so, no, all the conditioning came from him. And the conditioning in our tradition is entirely Shaolin based.
Right.
Shaolin are the, according to my research, the Shaolin are the people who started it and perfected it, and it was really an evolution. It wasn't even an idea; it was just an evolution.
Right.
And yeah, so it came from there, and it came from that specific line.
And would you say that's connected to the idea that we touched on earlier about body weapons?
Yes, absolutely. There's no question. It's directly connected.
So, what do you think was the catalyst amongst the Shaolin people to do this?
From what I can see in the old writings and what I can grasp from the old people, the last generation, it seems to have been a progression where, and I'm just going to use a wooden dummy as an example, where you would be practicing on a wooden dummy to practice a technique. And as you return the strike, you would, over a period of time, realize, geez, my hands have become quite hard, even though you weren't hitting it very hard.
Right.
You may have just been tapping it. And progressively, they discovered that the harder they tap, the harder their hands get.
Okay.
The harder they strike the arms of the dummy with their arms, the harder their forearm becomes.
Right.
As a defensive and as a weapon. And so it just progressed like that until obviously some guy said, well, I'm going to go like crazy.
Yeah, took it to the extreme.
Yeah. And Chinese are very good at doing things methodically and to the extreme like that.
Right.
And as you know. And we developed iron hand, iron body, iron everything else,
Right.
and so on. Hard fingers.
Okay, very very interesting. So this is it's an entire system, and there's a whole methodology that you hand and that you learned and that you teach if you do teach it on how to achieve this.
Yeah. Yes, and I do teach, and we teach everybody that comes to us, male or female, regardless. You cannot practice martial arts without conditioning.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's a natural conclusion. So, well, natural, I say, or logical rather, but not everybody has logic, so that's sad. But yes, that's a very interesting point, and I actually wanted to mention this earlier when we were talking. You were talking about wall running, and this aspect. Is there a connection between that practice and what later became considered something on its own called Qinggong or light body skills?
It's one and the same.
Okay, I was.
It's definitely one and the same. It seems that certain people in their writings would call it running roofs and walls. Some said running roofs, eaves, and walls. One guy wrote running roofs and walls and water. I still haven't worked out how to run the water part yet. Perhaps as we develop. But sometimes, as you know, there's poetry inside the writing. Yeah. So we have to discount that part of it. But it is all Qinggong, Hingong in Cantonese.
Right. Okay, what's interesting?
What's really interesting about Hingong is I have records of it being used up until 1950, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a record of one young kid and another young fellow who run away from an attack on an island called Cheungchao, and they run away along the roofs, and they use the skill to get away. So it's something that's existed for a long time, and it's very, very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It is very interesting. And what's old is new, what's new is old. I mean, you can see the whole craze that happened probably in the last 20 years with parkour, which is, I mean, it's another manifestation, probably with a different direction and to a different extreme, but it's relatively based on the same premise.
Yes.
Very interesting.
No, absolutely. I love some of the parkour, and some of them are extremely good.
Yeah.
But it's, as you say, there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, yeah. So you moved down to South Africa. What year was that?
We moved our stuff here 2009.
Yeah.
And then we had to go back to have Onyx born in Hong Kong. Otherwise, we would have had all sorts of paperwork problems. So we actually officially 2010.
You moved. And were you initially thinking of starting a school there?
No. When Kwan Sifu died, so Kwan Sifu died 2010 as well, and so that was a whole horrible thing. Kwan Sifu had met Onyx. She was just a tiny baby,
Yeah.
and he accepted her as his daughter, which you know the impact of that. And then that was the last we saw of him, and I went into a period of time where I just felt lost.
Of course.
Not. I mean, I'm old enough. It's not like death is something new to me. It's nothing like that. I just didn't feel this. Oh, I'm going to go and teach.
Yeah.
Not at all. Not at all. And only as time went on, we noticed the kids in the area were very weak mentally, and we started to think, how can we contribute to the society? And then after, I think it was 3 or 4 years later, we opened the school in order to try and contribute. That was all. There was no thought to teach, to be honest.
And your school, I mean, it ran from then. You started. I would imagine, from what I see, that your largest student base was mostly youngsters.
Yes, we do that deliberately. We teach youngsters rather than the older people. Older people come in with preconceived ideas.
Baggage.
They've been watching MMA or they've practiced some other martial art and they know that better. They never, ever listen.
Yeah.
So we do two things. I'll accept older students if they've never practiced before or if they've practiced a Japanese art. But I won't accept people who practice Chinese arts.
Why is that?
Generally. People will not listen and will not apply what you show. So, and I'm not going to compete with someone to show them that I know something. I don't. You know, if you don't want to learn, don't learn.
Right.
So I just rather not have them.
And you feel that people that come from a Japanese background generally have a better attitude, or they come with
very much so.
I wonder why that is.
I think things have been taught systematically, and people have been taught to be humble.
Yeah.
And as silly as that might sound, you have to learn to be humble. I think you do in this modern day and age. You have to be humbled by the teacher. You've got to be shoved down and told you're nothing.
Yeah.
And I think in the people who practice Japanese arts, they know that. And to be honest, their basics are better. They come forward and their basics are better, and you show them something, and they take it on. And you cannot do that with people from other schools of Chinese martial arts that I've experienced. Please don't get me wrong.
No, I understand. But would you say that possibly that's a reflection on the Chinese martial arts that are down there or existent down there at the moment?
I would like to believe that it's only a South African thing. I have met 2 people from Europe who came out to practice with us.
Okay. And
they were incredible. It was not at all like teaching South African people.
Yeah.
This South African ego is a sincere problem. The people from Europe were fantastic, and I've got strangely enough, there's a few people online who talk to me from around the world, and I find them totally different and humble and giving and so on. So I'm rather hoping that it's a South African thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I must tell you, we had 4 schools around the Far East, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong.
Okay.
And we used to do seminars all around the Far East, and never, ever, ever did I experience any of this.
Wow.
Not once.
Yeah, that says a lot, though. I was in South Africa. I was somewhat involved in the Chinese martial arts community there. And up until I left, it wasn't a very healthy community in terms of just, as you said, a lot of the attitudes, a lot of the antagonism between one another, and then never mind between one another, just what they thought they knew about themselves and their practice. I mean, given I was a lot younger then too, I probably had the same folly as a lot of them to certain degrees. But, you know,
don't we all?
But it's something that seems to be quite well, reinforced there for some odd reason.
Yes. No, I would agree with that. Definitely.
So you've been teaching in South Africa these years, and would you say that, I mean, apart from the kids, which I know you love teaching, and you have a great bunch of kids from what I've seen, were there any adults that managed to make the cut that are dedicated and continue, or not as much?
Absolutely, yes. I've got several of them, probably 4 or 5 that I can think of that are just outstanding.
Okay.
And I've been extremely impressed with the way they are, how supportive they are, and the way they apply themselves. It's been really, really good. But for whatever strange reason, and even in such a violent country as this, people aren't training. There's just not martial artists are just not coming forward and learning. So I don't know. Go figure that one.
That's
You'd rather
interesting.
just die in the street being held up. You know?
Right. One would think that they would drive people to be more active in the preparedness, but it doesn't seem to be the case.
Yep. No, not at all.
Well, the last part of this is what your plans are for the future, and what your thoughts are.
Well, I'd like to be able to tell you, but I'm not sure I can, because COVID-19 came and it's decimated our school from quite a big school into almost zero. In fact, I would say it's going to be zero at the end of this. Now, the lockdown here is long lasting. They're predicting that we can only start teaching again in January.
Oh my God.
And I just cannot see how we're going to survive till January. We get no support from the government. There's no support for the rents. There's nothing. You're on your own. So I think we are decimated. I have no clue what comes next, to be honest. But let me try to be a little more buoyant. I would like to see some of my stuff, my lineage, my art, my research go out into the world overseas.
I would too.
I would like to see the understanding that the ninja comes from China go out into the open world, and that it's a Chinese origin, and that there is an art in China exactly the same as that.
Right.
And I would like to see, if anything I could spread, is to see the children of the Western world be taught in the way in which we teach our kids. Because martial arts schools can grow, and we need proper martial arts schools to flourish financially in order to teach. You can't have broke teachers all the time.
Yeah.
It's no good.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be looking at teaching how to run martial arts schools as well. So just to put my angle on it. I'm not saying I have all the answers to everything, but we certainly have some of the answers.
So how are you? I mean, I'm fully supportive. I think it's great what you're proposing here, and I'd love to see you attain all of those. How are you thinking of implementing this to your next steps with this in mind?
Well, prior to COVID-19, we had a whole set of seminars set up.
Okay.
And of course, that's all been shattered now. And we can reopen the seminars in the Far East, but I don't see that as a direction to go. And I'll tell you why. Parents and young people are moving away from the martial arts in the Far East at rapid speed, as you know yourself. Yeah. They no longer have this deep interest. Now, that still exists in the West, and I think perhaps, and it does amongst expat Chinese in the West.
Yeah.
So I have an interest to try and promote that. But I'm really stumped as to what happens at the moment with this COVID-19. Yeah. So right now I'm writing and putting stuff online in the form of articles only for my own personal group, and one day we'll open it up to everybody and see where it goes.
Well, I think, if I may, I think as much as we are averse to the culture that surrounds social media, because as we spoke earlier, everybody's got a voice, but not everybody has skill or knowledge. But as averse we are to that culture, we can't deny the useful role it plays in doing what you are trying to say here, to get at least, not just as a first point, just some basic understanding, but secondly, to promote and to disseminate parts of these important points to the world at large. I mean, it might be something that you're going to have to start looking into, with all its positives and negatives.
In what?
Yeah, to start going.
I agree with you, but in what way?
Well,
Are you talking about doing online teaching?
At first, I would say I know that you're averse to that, and I agree with regards to how successfully you can teach someone in full, especially deeper knowledge online. But I would say, at least from a starting point, to be more active in terms of producing things on video, things like that, just to introduce these ideas. It's not like we're back in the day where in order to get some sort of TV exposure, you need to pay a lot of money. We're in an age now that if you put down the time and whatever, through YouTube and things like that, you can get your message out relatively cheap and instantly and across all borders. So I would suggest that maybe start looking into doing that, and it'll grow from there. It takes time, but at least you can start, spreading and getting people to be aware of these things and go from there.
Well, thank you. I'll certainly be looking into that.
It's unfortunate with the COVID-19 thing. God knows what's going to happen to the planet as a whole, what's going to happen in the next 6 months. But I really hope that you can, well, not only your school, for your students itself will come back to normal, and that you can continue doing the wonderful things you're doing there, but that you can go on from there to bigger things too. I hope so, for sure.
Well, thank you very much.
Well, it's been an honor talking to you. I could talk to you for hours. I don't want to take your whole morning. I know you said that you had some things to do, and we're getting close to 2 hours. We can do this again in the future, but it's been an honor talking to you for the last 2 hours, and I will put whatever relevant details you want put in there. Hopefully this podcast itself might get some people to be in contact with you with the right mind and the right intention. So whichever relevant details you want listed in the show notes and contact information, etc., I will put there. And if there's anything you'd like to say in the end, please do go ahead.
I'd only like to say I'm honored that you even asked me to be on here, and thank you. And anybody who's listened, thank you very much for listening.
Well, the honor's all mine. Well, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch as usual. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and thank you for being on.
Thank you. Have a good day, Mark.
You too.